Italy, first of all, is associated with Rome for us. It's the Colosseum, the legions, and Caesar. But before the Roman Empire even existed, in the north and center, the Apennines were already divided among noisy, wealthy cities. Trading ships sailed the seas, incense was burned in temples, and people were sent to the afterlife with music and gold. These were the Etruscans, a people who managed to build a civilization while Rome was still wallowing in swamps. We still don't fully understand their language, and their origins are still a matter of debate, but what they left behind speaks louder than any chronicles. And some of it we still continue to use. You're watching Amazing History, where we don't just retell textbooks, but piece together history from living traces. Special thanks to our sponsors and regular viewers. Thanks to your support, we can create complex episodes and release them on time. If you want to support us, check out the description. It's all simple there. Now let's get to the topic of this episode. Etruscans is not the real name of this people. It was the name given to them by the Romans to refer to foreigners from the north. The Greeks called them Tyrrhenians, and as we know, they called themselves Racina. It's not like that helped much. Their language still hasn't been fully deciphered. We can read the letters, but we don't always understand what's being said. The Racina's origin is one of the ancient world's oldest mysteries. Even Herodotus offered his own romantic version, saying that when a terrible famine struck Lydia, the locals split, half stayed, and half went west in search of new land. That's supposedly how the Etruscans appeared. A beautiful legend, but archaeology views it skeptically. There are no traces of migration or material culture confirming such a route. There is another, more pragmatic hypothesis that the Etruscans were not newcomers at all, but descendants of those who lived in Italy long before all the Greeks, Latins, and Gauls. Their language is not Indo-European, their customs do not fit into neighboring traditions, they seem to be from a parallel branch that survived the chaos of migrations. Modern geneticists have also tried to figure it out. Some DNA studies do show connections with Anatolia or even Syria, while others, on the contrary, point to local Italian roots. Those who see the Etruscans as a surviving part of ancient Europe's population, not newcomers who developed their own civilization, appear to be correct. If that's the case, then we're not looking at the descendants of settlers, but at bearers of the memory of times when neither Rome nor Athens yet existed on the map. Central and northern Italy during the Etruscan era was not a wild periphery, but a grand civilization, with city after city, Veii, Valsini, Tarquini, Clusium. Some of them grew on hills, others on the coast, at the gateway to the Mediterranean Sea. Almost all of them were surrounded by walls, with street networks, drainage systems, and centralized markets. Sounds Roman, unsurprisingly. The Romans borrowed a lot, even Rome itself, in many ways. Their project included the first forum, drainage system, and a circus for entertainment. All this emerged under the Etruscan king, not the Latin one. The Cloaca Maxima sewer, built by the Etruscans, still works to this day. Etruscan cities were not part of a single state. Each lived independently, like the city-states in Greece. They could fight each other, but they also knew how to embrace. Greece. The so-called League of 12 Cities was an alliance for festivals, diplomacy, and sometimes mutual defense. The Etruscans knew very well what wealth meant. Primarily thanks to maritime trade, they were excellent sailors, and their ships sailed all over the western Mediterranean, from Carthage to the south of France. They traded with the Greeks, the Phoenicians, and the Egyptians. They traded wine, metals, ceramics, and slaves for gold, glass, spices, dyes, fabrics, and ideas. Greek art, Phoenician writing, religious rituals, all of this the Etruscans absorbed, reinterpreted, and made their own. Houses were first built from wood, clay, and straw, and later from stone and brick. Wealthy estates had inner courtyards, altars, sewage systems, and even decorative pools. Archaeologists find remains of aqueducts, paved roads, and temples built hundreds of years before similar Roman ones. The Etruscans didn't just get ahead of Rome, they taught it how to live like a city. If you look at Etruscan society through the eyes of an ancient Greek or Roman, it looked simply shocking. And not because something terrible was happening there, but on the contrary, things were too free, too democratic, especially when it came to women. The Etruscans were among the few in antiquity where women were allowed to be individuals, not just shadows of their husbands, but also mistresses of the house, advisors, and even priestesses. They had the right to own property, could pass on their assets by inheritance, sat at banquets alongside men, and drank wine, which in Greece was considered almost shameful. Later, Roman moralists wrote in horror about the corrupt Etruscan women, but in reality, they were simply free. The Etruscans lived on a grand scale, valuing comfort, luxury, and art. In many tombs, bronze mirrors decorated with engravings are found, along with fine black ceramics, butchero, Greek pottery, and imported amphorae. The nobility wore bright clothing adorned with gold clasps and fibulae, their hair styled in elaborate hairstyles, their garments sparkling with jewelry, and the scent of expensive oils filled their homes. Appearance, like the gods, was not considered a sin. Luxury was a way of life. A separate chapter covers feasts, which took place both in life and the afterlife. Etruscan paintings depict men and women reclining together on couches, eating, drinking, listening to music, with musicians, dancers, and servants with wreaths, just like Greek symposiums but without the female taboo. A feast in Etruscan culture was not just about gluttony, but an important ritual connected with the memory of ancestors, hospitality, and the religious role of wine. And here lies a key point. The Etruscans did not divide the world into weekdays and holidays, into male and female, into body and soul. Everything was connected and part of life. From the mirror in the bedroom to the altar in the garden, from the ritual feast to everyday dishes. Their everyday life was filled with meaning and beauty. Etruscan religion isn't about benevolent gods and blessings. The divine can be harsh, and life after death is uncertain and challenging. Events on Earth were viewed as reflections of the god's will, so predictions, omens, and rituals influenced everything. The Etruscans had a complex, sometimes dark mythology. The chief god, Tinia, was the ruler of the sky, kind of like the local equivalent of Zeus, but even he was less free. He couldn't throw a lightning bolt without the permission of a special council of gods. His wife, Uni, was the patroness of marriage and fertility, but unlike the Greek Hera, she didn't throw jealous fits. The marriage of Tinia and Uni was considered harmonious. There was also Minerva, a warrior and goddess of wisdom. Among the Romans, she became Minerva, but for the Etruscans, unlike the Greeks, she wasn't a chaste maiden. She was a goddess with her own personal story, including love affairs. However, the main focus in Etruscan religion was not the pantheon, but the transition to the afterlife. This journey was not easy. The soul faced a voyage filled with obstacles, demons, monsters, and gates that not everyone could pass through. The frescoes in the tombs depicted terrifying creatures, winged demons, snake-legged gods, and charioteers of the dead. This is not a metaphor. The Etruscans believed that the soul literally had to pass these guardians. Sacrifices played an important role, and they were not always animals. On the frescoes, you can see scenes where captives or criminals are killed as part of a ritual. These rituals were accompanied by music, dancing, and apparently even duels, which the Romans later turned into gladiatorial games. It began as a funerary gesture, a fight held to honor a noble person at their funeral. Blood and death as a gift to the spirit. For the Etruscans, death was not the end, but an event that required theater and strength. This grim, otherworldly logic paired remarkably with afterlife feast aesthetics. The soul could find itself at an eternal banquet, but only if it completed the entire journey. This is also seen on tomb walls. Some show terrifying demons with sledgehammers, others feature music, wine, and dancing. The Etruscans seem to leave their dead with two options, either a feast or a battle, and most often both. If at feasts the Etruscans loved music, then on the battlefield they loved iron. Their army was not just a tool of defense, but a part of their culture, a status symbol, a ritual, and a means of influence. In early centuries, wars were like theatrical clashes. The wealthy rode chariots in armor, while the poor fought with slings and stones. These were conflicts between cities, raids, skirmishes, not total war. The weapons were already serious. Bronze helmets, iron swords, daggers, round shields, and spears, all handmade and often decorated with symbols of gods or family. Etruscan army and society were closely linked. Early on, mostly aristocrats fought. A skilled warrior was not only strong but also noble. His tomb was adorned with weapons, and his name praised in songs. This is reminiscent of Homeric Greece, where heroism was a personal matter, not a collective feat. However, as trade and contracts with Greece developed, things grew more complicated. The Etruscans borrowed amphorae, ornaments, and tactics from the Greeks by the 5th century before Christ. The phalanx appears, a formation of heavily armed warriors with spears and shields, moving in a tight line. This demanded discipline, coordination, and above all, civic duty. Now, it wasn't only the nobility fighting. As cities grew and the artisan class strengthened, the army increasingly became a people's force. Along with the phalanx, reforms in equipment also arrived. Helmets became more closed, shields became oval like those of the Greeks, armor became scale or segmented, and shoes and cloaks differed in color depending on the city. On frescoes and bronze, you can distinguish warriors from Torquini, Veii, and Clusium, each with their own details. Cavalry was also widely used for flank attacks and reconnaissance. But the issue of merging is just as important. The Etruscans were not just inspired by the Greeks, they themselves became teachers, because the Roman army in its early form grew out of the Etruscan foundation. Even the word triumph etymologically and ritually goes back to Etruscan victory celebrations. Many details of Roman military culture, signal trumpets, the use of fasces, the ritual of passing through an arch, all of this comes from the Etruscans, even the equipment. The early Roman pilum, that is, the throwing spear, and the scutum shield have obvious prototypes in Etruscan military culture. From there also came early drill discipline, sentry organization, and trumpet battle signals. Rome first learned from the Etruscans and then assimilated them. But there was also a weakness. The Etruscans were never a unified military alliance. City fought against city, even when an enemy came from outside. When Rome began to rise, it acted in a centralized, aggressive, and strategic way. The Etruscans acted individually, with pauses for feasts and prophecies. This inability to unite was probably their greatest military mistake. At first, Rome was not a threat to the Etruscans, but literally a source of raw material. A small Latin settlement in the swamps with shallow ditches and no serious fortifications. Etruscan cities like Veii or Tarquinia looked down on it, and rightly so, because they didn't just look, they ruled Rome. In the 7th century before Christ, Etruscan king Lucius Tarquinius Priscus from Tarquinia became Rome's ruler. He was more than a ruler, he was a reformer. He built, drained marshes following Etruscan models, laid roads, and constructed the Cloaca Maxima, which still functions today. He also began the construction of the Circus Maximus and introduced spectacular games, borrowed from Etruscan tradition, which were the forerunners of the Roman circus. Etruscan kings ruled Rome for 3 generations. The last of them, Tarquini the Proud, went down in history as cruel and tyrannical. His 509 before Christ overthrow put an end to the Roman monarchy and became the starting point for the creation of the Roman Republic. From this moment, history begins to unfold in reverse, and now Rome starts to conquer Etruscan lands. This process was slow at first. Rome gradually absorbed the Etruscans instead of storming them. The Etruscans were caught between outside enemies and internal strife. From the south, the Samnites pressed in. From the north, the Gauls. The Greeks pushed from the sea, and the cities of Etruria were never able to reach an agreement among themselves. In 396 before Christ, Veii fell, and it was one of the largest centers of Etruria, located right across from Rome. The fall was accompanied by complete devastation, a symbolic blow to all of Etruria. The other cities remained silent. They preferred to watch from the sidelines and made a fatal mistake. There were still attempts at resistance, the most serious one in 298 before Christ, when the Etruscans allied with the Gauls and Samnites against Rome. This final gamble failed. Rome conquered cities, making Etruria a province. The last to fall was Valcini in 264 before Christ, the very same year Rome began its war with Carthage. And yet, the Etruscans did not disappear overnight. In the 3rd century, they still spoke their language, kept Etruscan priests, and built in their style. However, Rome was expanding, Latinization was speeding up, and few people read Etruscan texts anymore. After the Social War, the situation changed completely. It was an uprising of Rome's Italian allies who demanded equal rights. In response to the armed rebellion, Rome granted citizenship to all former allies who were not previously Romans. The Etruscans received the coveted rights, but along with them, a ticket into the Roman world. From that moment, their cities became Roman legally and culturally, less and less Etruscan. By the 1st century AD, the Etruscan language disappears. The last inscriptions, faded formulas on tombstones, the last festivals dissolve into Roman tradition. Etruria, as an independent world, disappears without war, without catastrophe. It simply ceases to be needed, so what do we have? The Etruscans left almost no books. Their language disappeared, and their cities were erased from the map. But it was they who prepared the ground for Rome, not only in the literal sense, but also in the cultural sense. They were the first to imagine what civilized life in Italy could look like, with canals, temples, roads, festivals, and fortune tellers. And then they disappeared, almost as if on purpose, to clear the stage. And yet, every time someone exclaims Veni, Vidi, Vici, they're speaking words written in letters that came through Etruria. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.